My name is Bonnie Walker, 67 years old, and I never thought my only son would want me dead. Last Tuesday, I returned to my house, unexpectedly to grab some paperwork for my will update. As I approached the kitchen, I froze hearing Jackson and his wife Melissa whispering. Their words pierced my heart like daggers. If she dies before Saturday, we inherit everything. My world collapsed around me as they discussed how my death would solve all their problems. Before I tell you what I overheard and what I did next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and subscribe if you want more stories about family betrayal and how I overcame it. Life was beautiful once. Thomas and I built our dreams together over 40 years of marriage. We raised our son Jackson in a home filled with love and laughter. Thomas was the love of my life, my partner in everything. When cancer took him 3 years ago, I thought nothing could hurt worse than watching him fade away in that hospital bed. I was wrong. Thomas and I worked hard our entire lives. We started with nothing but ambition and determination. Over 30 years, we built a chain of boutique clothing stores across 3 states. By the time we sold the business, we had enough saved to enjoy a comfortable retirement. We had our dream house investments that provided steady income and enough set aside to help Jackson and eventually leave him a substantial inheritance. We wanted to make sure our only child would always be taken care of. Jackson grew up with advantages Thomas and I never had. Private schools, summer camps, college without student loans. We may have spoiled him looking back. He was always a bit entitled, but he had a good heart. At least I thought he did. He followed in our entrepreneurial footsteps, starting a marketing agency that did reasonably well, though he often came to us for financial help during rough patches. When Jackson married Melissa 5 years ago, I was thrilled. She seemed perfect for him, smart, ambitious, and she appeared to genuinely care for him. Thomas and I welcomed her into our family with open arms. We helped them with the down payment on their house as a wedding gift. We wanted to give them a good start. Melissa was always interested in our business success, asking questions about our investments and properties. I thought she was just trying to learn from our experience. After Thomas died, I decided to downsize. The house felt too empty, too full of memories. I moved to a smaller place about 20 minutes away from Jackson and Melissa. They helped with the move, which I appreciated. But looking back, I remember how interested Melissa was in cataloging my possessions, asking casual questions about the value of artwork and furniture. At the time, I thought she was just being helpful. Their visits increased after Thomas passed. Weekly dinners, surprise drop-ins. Jackson started asking more questions about my finances, suggesting I might want to add him to my accounts in case anything happened to me. He brought up the will a few times, asking if I had updated it since Thomas died. I told him not to worry, that everything was in order. The truth was, I had been meaning to meet with Harold, my lawyer, but kept putting it off. Grief has a way of making even simple tasks seem overwhelming. Then came my health scare last month. It was nothing serious in the end, just chest pain from acid reflux that mimicked heart attack symptoms. But the way Jackson and Melissa reacted when I was in the hospital struck me as odd. They seemed almost disappointed when the doctor said I was fine to go home the next day. Melissa kept asking the doctor detailed questions about my health, my medication, my prognosis. It felt excessive for what turned out to be indigestion. After that incident, their attention became even more pronounced. Daily calls checking on me. Melissa bringing over meals she insisted contained heart-healthy ingredients. Jackson offering to pick up my prescriptions. At first, I was touched by their concern. Now I wonder if they were just keeping tabs on me, waiting. Last week, I finally met with Harold to update my will. Thomas had left everything to me, and I wanted to make sure Jackson would be taken care of when I was gone. Harold asked for some documents I had left at home, financial statements and property deeds. He needed them to properly account for all assets. I told him I would bring them to our next meeting on Saturday. Tuesday morning, I realized I had forgotten to gather those documents. Jackson and Melissa were supposed to be at work, so I decided to stop by my house to collect what I needed. I still had a key, of course. I never imagined what that simple errand would reveal. It was just after 10 in the morning when I pulled into my driveway. The spring day was bright and clear, birds singing in the maple tree by the porch. I remember those details vividly, the beautiful normalcy of the moment before my world shattered. Their cars were both there, which surprised me. Jackson had told me he had client meetings all day, and Melissa was supposed to be showing houses. She had started selling real estate the year before. I thought about texting to let them know I was stopping by, but decided to just use my key and grab what I needed without disturbing them. I entered quietly through the side door that leads directly to my home office. My plan was to get the documents from the filing cabinet and leave. But as I stepped inside, I heard their voices coming from the kitchen across the hall. They were speaking in hushed tones, but in the quiet house their words carried clearly. I should have announced my presence. Instead, something in their secretive tone made me pause. I stood silently by the office door listening. Jackson spoke first, his voice unusually cold. "Mom is definitely getting worse. You saw how she looked at dinner Sunday, confused about her medication, forgetting things. That heart thing last month was just the beginning." "I want to believe it will happen naturally," Melissa replied, "but we need to be sure it happens before Saturday. You heard what she said about meeting with Harold again. What if she changes the will?" "She won't," Jackson said. "She has always said everything would go to me. But yes, Saturday is our deadline. Once those papers are signed, if anything changes, we lose everything." There was the sound of papers rustling. Melissa spoke again. "According to this, if she dies before changing the will, we get the house, the lake property, her investment accounts, everything. Over $2 million, Jackson. We could pay off our debts, renovate the house the way we want, maybe even buy that vacation property in Colorado." My son laughed. A sound I used to love now chilling me to the bone. $2 million is conservative. Those antiques she keeps are worth a fortune alone. And she has insurance policies we can cash in. Melissa lowered her voice further, forcing me to strain to hear. "But how can we be sure it happens before Saturday? Natural causes might take too long." Jackson responded so casually, as if discussing nothing more important than dinner plans, her heart medication. "The doctor increased her dosage last week. If she were to take, say, 3 times the prescribed amount, it would look like she got confused and took too much," Melissa finished. "Given her recent memory issues, no one would question it." They clinked glasses together. I could picture them toasting to my death, these two people I loved and trusted. "Think about it," Jackson continued. "By this time next week she will be gone, we will be rich, and no one will ever know." I must have made a sound then, a gasp or a stifled cry, because they suddenly went silent. I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding so loudly I was certain they would hear it. After a moment, their conversation shifted to something mundane about grocery shopping. I crept back to the side door and silently let myself out, not caring about the documents anymore. My legs felt numb as I walked to my car. I managed to drive 2 blocks before I had to pull over, my vision blurred by tears, my body shaking uncontrollably. The words kept echoing in my mind. "If she dies before Saturday, we inherit everything." My only child was plotting my death. The grandchild I had hoped for but never received. Now I understood the reason for their delays and excuses. They were waiting for their inheritance before starting a family. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, waves of nausea washing over me. My phone buzzed several times. Text messages from Jackson asking how my day was going, if I needed anything from the store. The casual cruelty of it broke something inside me. How could I have raised someone capable of this? Where had I gone wrong, Thomas? And I had given him everything, supported every dream, celebrated every achievement. Had we created this monster through our generosity? Or was this Melissa's influence? I wanted to believe she had corrupted him, but his voice had been cold, calculating. This was no reluctant participant being led astray. I tried to convince myself I had misheard or misunderstood. Perhaps they were discussing a movie plot or a book, but I knew what I had heard. The specific details, the mention of my medication, Harold, the will, Saturday. This was no misunderstanding. This was a murder plot. My murder. I couldn't go home. They had a key to my house, and I couldn't bear the thought of them checking on me, pretending concern while watching for signs their plan was working. Instead, I drove aimlessly, eventually finding myself at a small motel on the outskirts of town, a place Thomas and I had never visited, where Jackson would never think to look for me. The motel room was clean but sparse. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the floral print on the wall without really seeing it. My mind replayed scenes from Jackson's childhood. His 5th birthday when he blew out candles on a superhero cake, teaching him to ride a bike, his little face determined as he pedaled away. His high school graduation, how proud Thomas and I had been. His wedding day when I had hugged Melissa and welcomed her as a daughter. Had it all been a lie? Had Jackson always seen me as nothing more than a path to wealth? I thought of all the times we had helped him financially over the years. College tuition, business startup, cost the house down payment. Had he been calculating the cost of keeping me alive versus the benefit of my death all along? Maybe I was the one who had failed. Had I not shown him enough love? Had I been too focused on the business when he was young? Thomas and I worked long hours building our company. We provided well, but perhaps we had missed something essential in raising our son, some crucial lesson in compassion or gratitude. I picked up my phone and scrolled through recent photos. Jackson and Melissa at Christmas dinner smiling beside me under the tree. Jackson helping me plant flowers on Mother's Day. All performances, it seemed now. Scenes in a play where the audience of one me was being set up for the final act. Sleep was impossible that night. I paced the small room, alternatively crying and sitting in numb silence. By morning, my sadness had begun to transform into something else. A slow, burning anger. I had given life to Jackson, nurtured and loved him. I had welcomed Melissa into my family. Their betrayal deserved consequences. I called Patricia my oldest friend. We had met in college and remained close through marriages, children, careers, and widowhood. She was the one person I trusted completely. "Bonnie, what's wrong? You sound terrible," she said when she answered. "I need to see you, Pat. Something has happened. I can't talk about it over the phone. Can you meet me?" She didn't hesitate. "Of course. Where are you?" I gave her the motel information, and she arrived less than an hour later. Her face showed her concern when she saw me still in yesterday's clothes, eyes swollen from crying. "For God's sake, Bonnie, what's happened?" "Jackson called me last night looking for you. He said you missed dinner and weren't answering your phone. He sounded worried, sick." I laughed bitterly. "Did he? How convincing. Did he mention he's planning to murder me for my money?" Patricia stared at me, her expression shifting from concern to shock. "What are you talking about?" I told her everything. The overheard conversation, the plot to overdose me on my heart medication, the deadline of Saturday before my will update. As I spoke, I could see her initial skepticism fade into horror. "You need to go to the police," she said immediately. "And tell them what?" "That I overheard a conversation. I have no proof. It would be my word against theirs, and Jackson would convince everyone I was confused, possibly suffering from dementia. He's been laying that groundwork already, telling people I'm becoming forgetful." Patricia took my hand. "What are you going to do?" For the first time since the discovery, clarity began to emerge through my emotional fog. "I'm going to talk to Harold first. Then I'm going to find a way to expose them. They want my money. They'll have to work a lot harder than this to get it." That afternoon, I called Harold's office and requested an urgent meeting. I didn't reveal the full situation to his secretary, only that there was a family emergency that required immediate attention to my estate planning. While waiting for the appointment time, Patricia helped me make a list of what I needed to do. First, find somewhere safe to stay where Jackson and Melissa couldn't find me. Second, secure my financial accounts and medication. Third, gather evidence of their plan. The practical steps helped focus my mind, channeling my hurt and anger into productive action. By the time I met with Harold the next morning, I had stopped crying. The heartbreak remained, but it was now encased in a hardening shell of resolve. Harold Goldstein had been my lawyer for over 30 years. He had helped Thomas and me set up our business, navigated our expansion, handled the sale when we retired, and managed our estate planning. He was in his 70s now, but sharp as ever with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He listened without interruption as I recounted what I had overheard. His expression remained professional, but I could see the shock in his eyes. "Bonnie, these are extremely serious allegations," he said when I finished. "Are you absolutely certain about what you heard?" "I wish I wasn't, Harold. I wish there was some other explanation. But there isn't. They were explicitly discussing killing me before our meeting on Saturday." He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "From a legal standpoint, this is complicated. Overhearing a conversation isn't the same as having concrete evidence. If we went to the police now, it would be your word against theirs." "That's what I figured. So what can I do?" Harold leaned forward. "If what you overheard is true, your safety is the immediate priority. You were right not to go home. They must not know that you're aware of their plans." "I've been staying with Patricia," I told him. "Jackson doesn't know we're in contact." "Good. Keep it that way. Now, regarding your will, I suggest we proceed with the changes immediately rather than waiting until Saturday. We can explicitly exclude Jackson and Melissa." I shook my head. "No, that would alert them that something is wrong. I think we need to set a trap, Harold. I need proof of what they're replanning." Harold considered this. It would be safer to just cut them out and stay away from them. And let them get away with it. Let them move on to target someone else. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Besides, they know where I live, where Patricia lives. They have keys to my house. I don't think I'll ever feel safe unless they face consequences for what they've planned. Harold nodded slowly. "I understand, but please consider the risk. These are people who have already demonstrated they're willing to commit murder for money. That's why we need to be careful. But I need to do this, Harold. Will you help me?" He sighed. "Of course I will, but we do this carefully with proper precautions, and we involve law enforcement as soon as we have credible evidence." We spent the next hour outlining a plan. I would create a new will, but not the one Jackson and Melissa expected. This will would leave my estate to various charities with a small provision for Jackson contingent on specific conditions. However, I wouldn't tell them about these changes. Instead, I would lead them to believe I was creating an even more favorable will for Jackson, adding newly discovered assets. This would give them a stronger motive to act while simultaneously removing their actual potential gain. Harold suggested we bring in a trusted witness to the plan, someone who could testify if needed. Patricia was the obvious choice, but we also needed someone with law enforcement experience. "What about Bill Hawkins?" I suggested. "My neighbor, the retired police detective." Harold nodded. "Perfect. His testimony would carry significant weight. We'll bring him in." Next came the matter of evidence collection. I needed to catch Jackson and Melissa discussing their plans again, but this time with recording devices in place. Harold was concerned about legal admissibility, but agreed it was necessary for my safety. After leaving Harold's office, I went to an electronics store and purchased several small recording devices and cameras. I felt like I was in some kind of spy movie, but the gravity of the situation kept me focused. This wasn't entertainment. This was survival. I called Bill Hawkins that evening from Patricia's house. Bill had lived next door to Thomas and me for 15 years before I moved. He had always been friendly and helpful, especially after Thomas died. His background as a detective made him perfect for what I needed. Bill arrived at Patricia's within the hour after my call. His weathered face grew increasingly grim as I explained the situation. Unlike Patricia, he didn't question my account for a moment. "I've seen cases like this before," he said. "Elder exploitation often escalates to violence when there's significant money involved. And you rewrite we need hard evidence." His professional assessment was both validating and terrifying. This wasn't just a personal nightmare. It was a recognized pattern of criminal behavior. Bill helped me plan the technical aspects of evidence collection. Where to place recording devices for maximum effectiveness. How to ensure they wouldn't be discovered, what kind of evidence would be most compelling to prosecutors. I also reached out to my niece Sophie, my late sister's daughter. She lived 2 states away, and Jackson rarely kept in contact with her. I needed someone else who could serve as both support and witness, someone Jackson wouldn't suspect was helping me. Sophie was horrified by what I told her and immediately offered to come stay with me. She arrived the next day, adding another person to my growing support team. The final piece of preparation involved my doctor. I made an appointment with Dr. Levine, ostensibly for a follow-up to my recent health scare. Once in her office, I shared my concerns about medication tampering. Dr. Levine was appropriately alarmed and documented my concerns. She also helped me secure my current medication and provided information about what signs would indicate an attempted overdose. She couldn't be directly involved in our plan, but her medical documentation could prove valuable later. By Thursday morning, 4 days after overhearing the plot, I was ready to set my trap. I had a support team recording devices, a modified will, and a detailed plan. Now I needed to lay the bait and see if Jackson and Melissa would take it. The first step was to make contact with Jackson again. I needed to act normal to pretend I was oblivious to his murderous intentions. It was perhaps the most difficult performance of my life. I called him Thursday morning, making sure to sound slightly breathless, as if I was still experiencing minor heart issues. "Mom, where have you been? We've been worried sick." Jackson's voice was perfect, concern layered with just the right amount of scolding. If I hadn't heard his true intentions with my own ears, I would have been completely convinced. "I'm sorry to worry you, sweetie. I had a bit of a spell, and Patricia took me to her cabin for a few days of rest. No cell service up there. You should have told me. I could have come with you, helped take care of you." Each word from him felt like a knife twisting in my heart. The ease with which he lied, the false concern. My son, the man I had raised, was a complete stranger to me now. "Actually, that's why I'm calling. I got some surprising news from Harold's office. Apparently there's some additional property in your father's name that we didn't know about. A parcel of land upstate that's now worth quite a bit since they redeveloping that area." I could almost hear his interest sharpening over the phone. "Really? That's fantastic news. How much is it worth?" "Harold says possibly 7 figures given the development plans. I'm going to his office on Saturday to sign the updated will to include it, but I wanted to tell you first. It will all go to you eventually, of course." Jackson's voice changed subtly, excitement poorly masked by forced casualness. "That's great, Mom. Hey, why don't you come over for dinner tonight? Melissa is making lasagna, your favorite." Just as Bill had predicted, an invitation to their territory where they would have more control. "That sounds lovely, but I'm still feeling a bit weak. Would you mind coming to my place instead? I can order something in?" Jackson agreed readily, suggesting they could come at 6. I told him I did look forward to it, and managed to keep my voice steady until I hung up. Patricia, Bill, and Sophie helped me prepare my house for the evening. We placed recording devices in strategic locations, the kitchen, living room, and most importantly, the bathroom medicine cabinet, where I kept my heart medication. Bill had brought specialized equipment that would allow us to monitor the feeds from Patricia's house nearby. Sophie would remain with me as both support and an additional witness. We carefully staged the scene, making sure certain documents were visible, but secured. A copy of the current will in a drawer with an official-looking seal. Property records on my desk with yellow highlights marking the supposed new discovery. A legal-looking letter from Harold about the upcoming appointment. All perfect bait for their trap. I prepared Jackson's favorite meal myself, despite the team's offers to help. There was something grimly satisfying about cooking for my son one last time now, aware of his true nature. I made beef bourguignon, the dish I always prepared for special celebrations. I wondered if he would appreciate the irony that I was making his favorite meal while he plotted to make it my last. Sophie stayed in the guest bedroom when they arrived under the pretense of having a migraine and needing darkness and quiet. This allowed her to be present without arousing suspicion. Jackson and Melissa arrived exactly at 6, bearing a bottle of expensive wine and flowers. Melissa hugged me with convincing affection. You had us so worried, Bonnie. Jackson was beside himself. I'm sorry about that. Just needed some quiet time, I said, accepting the flowers. Jackson studied me carefully. You look tired, Mom. Are you sure you were taking your medication properly? The concern in his voice would have touched me just a week earlier. Now it made my skin crawl, knowing he was assessing my vulnerability. I think so, but you know how I get confused sometimes. I deliberately let my hand shake slightly as I arranged the flowers in a vase. Throughout dinner, they were the picture of loving family members. Jackson told amusing stories about his clients. Melissa asked thoughtful questions about my health and offered to organize my medications for me. They exchanged occasional glances that I now recognized as silent communication. Halfway through the meal, I initiated the next phase of our plan. I mentioned feeling a bit lightheaded and coughed several times, making a show of trying to catch my breath. Mom, are you okay? Jackson asked right on cue. Just need my medication. I stood unsteadily. I'll get it from the bathroom. Let me help you, Melissa offered, rising from her chair. No, I'm fine. Just need a moment. I waved her off and made my way to the hallway bathroom. Once inside, I took my position by the door, listening. Through a small earpiece Bill had provided, I could hear the kitchen feed clearly. Jackson and Melissa immediately began whispering. She looks worse than Sunday, Melissa said. This might be easier than we thought. Did you see those property documents on her desk? Jackson replied. Harold wasn't kidding about the value. That development could be worth millions. After Saturday, it'll be our development. Melissa's voice was eager. Do you think she'll take her medication on her own, or will we need to help her along? I'll check what she's taking when she comes back. See if there's an opportunity tonight. I flushed the toilet and ran water in the sink, then deliberately bumped against the bathroom door to signal my return. Their conversation immediately shifted back to innocuous topics. During dessert, I made a point of mentioning that the property documents needed to be signed and returned to Harold on Saturday. He's prepared the final version of the will, too. Everything will be official by Saturday afternoon. I suppressed a shudder as I watched their expressions. They were barely containing their anticipation. I excused myself again after dessert, complaining of fatigue. This time I left my purse on the kitchen counter, visible but not obvious. Inside was my pill organizer. Through my earpiece I listened as Jackson suggested they clean up while I rested. Perfect. Within minutes I heard the sound of my purse being opened. Found her pills, Melissa whispered. Look at this, all organized by day. This is the heart medication, right? Jackson asked. The one the doctor increased. Yes, Dr. Levine said 1 tablet twice daily. But if she took, say, 6 or 7 at once. There was the sound of pills rattling. I want to check something first. The bathroom cabinet might have the original bottle with the warning labels. I tensed. This was exactly what we had anticipated. I signaled to Sophie through a text message, and she prepared to record from the guest room as Melissa approached the bathroom. Our hidden camera captured her searching through my medicine cabinet, finding the prescription bottle and reading the label. She then returned to the kitchen with it. "We're in business," she told Jackson. Warning clearly states that exceeding the recommended dose could cause heart failure. And look, it's a new prescription, nearly full. I could handle 4 or 5 extra pills in her daily dose, Jackson said. She'd never notice. By Saturday morning we call for an ambulance, but it's already too late. Tragic accident. Their callousness was breathtaking. They discussed my death with the same casual tone one might use to plan a dinner menu. Perfect, Melissa agreed. We'll tell her we've organized her pills for the week. She'll appreciate the help. By this time tomorrow it'll be done. Saturday we mourn, Sunday we celebrate. I closed my eyes, letting their words wash over me. Any lingering doubt was now completely erased. My son and his wife were actively planning to murder me within 24 hours. Sophie texted me that everything was being recorded clearly. Bill and Patricia confirmed they were receiving the feed at her house. We had them. I composed myself and returned to the kitchen, finding Jackson and Melissa loading the dishwasher, the picture of helpful family members. My pill organizer was back in my purse, now filled with what would have been a lethal dose. "You two are so sweet to clean up," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm afraid I need to lie down now, though. This day has tired me out." "Of course, Mom." Jackson came to hug me, and I had to fight the urge to recoil from his touch. "By the way, I organized your pills for the next few days. They were a bit jumbled in the container." "Thank you, sweetie. So thoughtful." I looked him in the eyes, searching for any sign of the little boy I had raised. There was nothing there but calculation. After they left, Sophie emerged from the guest room, her face pale. I heard everything through the monitor. "I can't believe they actually did it. They tampered with your medication." Bill and Patricia arrived minutes later. Bill immediately secured the pill organizer as evidence documenting the excessive medication dosage Jackson had prepared. "We've got them, Bonnie," he said grimly. "This is attempted murder, clear as day. We have both the planning conversation and the actual tampering on record." I sat heavily in my kitchen chair, suddenly exhausted. We had the evidence we needed, but the victory felt hollow. My son had just tried to kill me and had nearly succeeded. If I hadn't overheard them by chance, I would likely be dead by Saturday. "Tomorrow," I said. Finally, we moved to the final phase, the emergency and the confrontation. Friday morning, I called Jackson to tell him I wasn't feeling well after dinner. He immediately suggested coming over to check on me, his voice solicitous with false concern. "That would be wonderful," I told him. "My medication doesn't seem to be helping much today." He arrived with Melissa 30 minutes later. I had prepared myself, applying makeup to look pale and unwell. Sophie was once again hidden in the guest room, monitoring the recording equipment. Bill and Patricia were stationed at her house nearby, ready to arrive at the prearranged signal. 2 police officers that Bill had briefed were also on standby, waiting in an unmarked car down the street. "I can't tell you how dizzy I've been feeling," I told Jackson as he and Melissa entered. "Ever since I took my morning pills." His eyes lit up with an eagerness he quickly masked. "Have you taken your heart medication?" he asked. "The new dosage?" "Yes, just as you organized it for me. Thank you again for doing that." Melissa and Jackson exchanged a quick glance that I would have missed if I hadn't been looking for it. "Why don't you lie down?" Mom Melissa suggested. "Let us take care of you today." I allowed them to guide me to the couch, where I continued my performance of gradually worsening symptoms. Occasionally clutching my chest, breathing with deliberate labor, mentioning numbness in my arm. All symptoms of heart distress that would be consistent with an overdose of my medication. Jackson kept checking his watch surreptitiously. Melissa made a show of calling my doctor but conveniently couldn't reach her. They were playing their parts, perfectly establishing their alibi for when I would be found dead. At precisely 11:30, the time we had arranged, Bill called Jackson's phone. I could only hear Jackson's side of the conversation, but it went exactly as planned. "Yes, this is Jackson Walker." "Yes, I am, with my mother now." "She's what?" "That's not possible, her car is here." "Are you sure?" "Yes, I understand." He hung up, his expression confused. "That was your neighbor. He says there's someone trying to break into your storage shed behind the house. Some teenager. He's going to call the police, but he thought I should check first since I am here." It was the perfect excuse to get Jackson out of the house temporarily. We needed him separated from Melissa briefly for the next stage of our plan. "You should go look," I said weakly. "Those garden antiques in there are irreplaceable." Jackson hesitated, looking at Melissa. "You'll be okay with Mom for a minute." Melissa nodded. "Go. I'll call you if anything changes." As soon as Jackson left through the back door, I put my plan into motion. I suddenly clutched my chest more dramatically and slumped sideways on the couch. "Bonnie," Melissa called, moving closer. "Are you okay?" I allowed my eyes to flutter and close, my breathing becoming shallow. I had practiced this performance carefully, making it appear that I was losing consciousness. Oh my God, Bonnie. Melissa shook my shoulder, her voice panicked. But I noted it was a performance for potential witnesses as no one else was supposedly in the house. When I didn't respond, she quickly pulled out her phone, but instead of calling 911 as any concerned person would, she called Jackson. "Get back in here now," she hissed when he answered. "I think it's happening. She's unconscious. The pills must be working faster than we expected." There was a pause as she listened to him. "No, don't call an ambulance yet. We need to make sure she's actually, check the shed situation first, then get back in here. We need to get our story straight before we call anyone." She hung up and I felt her checking my pulse at my wrist. Her touch was clinical, not concerned. "Well, Bonnie," she said quietly, thinking I couldn't hear. "Looks like our inheritance is coming a day early. Sorry about this, but Jackson really needs this money. We both do. You've had a good long life anyway." The coldness in her voice was chilling. This woman who had called me mom, who had shared holidays and family dinners with me, was calmly waiting for me to die. I heard the back door open as Jackson returned. He rushed into the living room. "There's nobody at the shed," he said. "Bill must have been mistaken. How is she?" "Pulse is weak, breathing shallow. I think it's working," Melissa replied. "We should wait a bit longer before calling 911. Make sure it looks like we tried everything to save her." They were talking about me as if I was already dead, discussing the details of their plan in the open now that they thought I couldn't hear them. "Did you move her pill organizer?" Jackson asked. "We should make it look like she accidentally took too many." "Already done," Melissa answered. "I put it in the bathroom with pills scattered around like she dropped it. The prescription bottle is there too, open." "Good thinking," Jackson said. "We need to get our story straight. We came over because she wasn't feeling well, found her confused and disoriented. By the time we realized something was wrong with her medication, it was too late. Tragic accident. No one will question it, given her recent health issues." Melissa added, "We should look appropriately devastated when the paramedics arrive. Not too much, just the right amount of shock and grief." They continued planning the details of their performance, how they would act with first responders, what they would tell the doctors, all while I lay supposedly dying in front of them. After they had thoroughly incriminated themselves, I decided it was time. I had heard enough. I pressed the panic button on the small device in my hand, signaling to Bill and the officers outside. Then, timing it perfectly with the sound of the front door opening, I sat up suddenly. The look of shock on their faces was something I will never forget. Jackson actually stumbled backward, his face draining of color. Melissa froze mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open. "Surprise," I said calmly. "I'm not dead yet." The front door burst open as Bill and Patricia entered, followed by the two police officers. Sophie emerged from the guest room, tablet in hand, where she had been monitoring and backing up all recordings. "What is this?" Jackson demanded, trying to regain his composure. "Mom, what's going on?" "I think you know exactly what's going on, Jackson," I said, all pretense gone from my voice. "I heard you both on Tuesday, every word about killing me before Saturday, and now we all heard your charming discussion of how to cover up my murder." "That's ridiculous," Melissa sputtered. "You're confused, Bonnie. We were just worried about you." One of the police officers stepped forward. "Mrs. Walker, are these the recordings you mentioned?" I nodded, and Sophie handed over the tablet. The officer spent several minutes reviewing the footage, his expression growing increasingly grim. "Jackson Warren Walker and Melissa Ann Walker, you are both under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder," he finally said, reaching for his handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." The reality of the situation finally seemed to hit Jackson. His face crumpled, not in remorse, but in frustrated rage. "This is insane," he shouted. "She set us up. She's always been manipulative, trying to control me with her money." Melissa was more calculating. She looked me directly in the eye. "You can't prove anything. It's your word against ours, and you're a confused old woman with heart problems." "Actually," Bill interjected, "we have extensive video and audio evidence of both your planning conversations and the actual medication tampering. The pills you added to Mrs. Walker's organizer have already been tested, and confirmed to contain 3 times the normal dosage. That's attempted murder, clear and simple. As the officers began reading them their rights, Jackson suddenly broke down. "This was all Melissa's idea," he cried, turning on his wife. "She's been planning this for years. I just went along with it because we needed the money." Melissa's face contorted with fury. "You piece of garbage. This was your mother. Your idea. Don't you dare blame this on me." Their unified front collapsed entirely as they were handcuffed, each trying to blame the other. The officers separated them, leading them to different patrol cars that had arrived outside. I watched through the window as my son was placed in the back of a police car. Despite everything, a part of my heart broke all over again. This was my child, the baby I had nursed, the boy I had raised. Now a man I no longer recognized being taken away to face charges for trying to kill me. Patricia put her arm around my shoulders. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "No," I answered truthfully. "I don't think I'll ever be okay again. But I'll survive. I've always been a survivor." In the days that followed, the legal process began. Jackson and Melissa were formally charged with conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. The evidence against them was overwhelming. The recordings, the tampered medication, the testimony of witnesses. There was media coverage, of course. The story was too sensational to ignore. Beloved son plots to kill mother for inheritance. My privacy was invaded. My pain made public. Old friends called expressing shock and offering support. Distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly appeared curious about the scandal and likely my will. Throughout it all, I maintained my dignity. I gave no interviews, made no public statements. This was a private tragedy despite its public nature. My support team, Patricia, Bill, Sophie, and Harold, formed a protective circle around me, shielding me from the worst of the intrusion. Jackson tried to contact me from jail, sending letters professing remorse, claiming Melissa had manipulated him. I couldn't bring myself to read beyond the first one. The betrayal was too deep, the wound still too raw. Melissa, for her part, maintained her innocence despite the evidence claiming Jackson had coerced her. Their marriage, it seemed, had dissolved as quickly as their murder plot had unraveled. In the end, facing overwhelming evidence, they both accepted plea deals rather than risk trial. Jackson received 15 years for his role with possibility of parole after 10. Melissa, who had been more actively involved in the tampering, received 18 years. The day of their sentencing, I sat in the courtroom straight-backed and composed. The judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I declined. There were no words that could adequately describe the impact of this betrayal. No sentence that could repair what had been broken. As Jackson was led away, he looked back at me one last time. In his eyes, I saw not remorse, but calculation. Even then, he was thinking about how to use this situation to his advantage. I realized in that moment that I had lost my son long ago, perhaps had never really known him at all. I left the courthouse that day, feeling neither victory nor closure. Only a hollow certainty that this chapter of my life had ended, and it was time to begin something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The first months after the trial were the darkest. I moved out of my house, unable to stay in a place with so many painful memories. Patricia insisted I stay with her until I found somewhere new, and I gratefully accepted. Being alone with my thoughts was dangerous territory in those early days. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket. I questioned everything about my life, my parenting, my values, my judgment. How could I have raised someone capable of such calculated cruelty? How could I have welcomed Melissa into my family so blindly? Sleep was fitful, haunted by dreams of betrayal. I lost weight, losing interest in food and most other things that had once brought me pleasure. Patricia watched over me with concern, eventually insisting I see a therapist. Dr. Klein specialized in trauma and betrayal. A gentle woman in her 50s, she created a safe space where I could express the complicated grief I was experiencing. Because it was grief, she explained. I had lost my son, just as surely as if he had died, perhaps more painfully so. It's a special kind of trauma when someone you love betrays you so fundamentally, she told me. It shatters your understanding of reality, makes you question your own judgment and memories. The therapy was painful, but necessary. I had to examine our family history with new eyes, looking for signs I might have missed. There were some in retrospect, small cruelties Jackson had displayed as a teenager, an excessive focus on material things, a tendency to blame others for his mistakes. But there was also the truth that sometimes people simply make terrible choices, and those choices aren't necessarily predictable from their past. Jackson had made his choice. Now I needed to make mine about how to move forward. 3 months after the trial, I received a letter from Jackson from prison. Unlike his earlier attempts at communication, this one contained no protestations of innocence or blame shifting. Instead, it was a cold, practical request for money to make his life in prison more comfortable. That letter was clarifying. It showed me that even now, after everything, he still saw me as nothing more than a resource to be used. I wrote a brief response, informing him that I would not be providing financial support, and that any future communication should go through my lawyer. It was the last direct contact we had. The reality of the situation finally seemed to hit Jackson. His face crumpled not in remorse but in frustrated rage. "This is insane," he shouted. "She set us up. She's always been manipulative, trying to control me with her money." I sold my business properties and invested the proceeds in ways that would benefit causes I believed in. This restructuring of my financial legacy became a source of healing. What had been intended as a death sentence became instead a new purpose for living. 6 months after the trial, I found a new home in a community 2 hours away. A small cottage with a garden near a lake that reminded me of where Thomas and I had spent our honeymoon. Patricia helped me move in, and Sophie visited regularly. In my new community, no one knew my story unless I chose to share it. I was just Bonnie, the new neighbor with the beautiful flower garden. The privacy was healing after the public nature of the trial and its aftermath. I began volunteering at a local community center, teaching a class on financial literacy for seniors. My experience in business made me well qualified, and sharing my knowledge felt meaningful. Gradually, I added a component about recognizing and avoiding financial exploitation, sharing my story when it seemed helpful to others. Through this volunteer work, I met Martha and George, a couple in their 70s who became dear friends. They invited me to their family gatherings, including me as if I'd always been part of their circle. Their genuine warmth helped restore some of my faith in human connection. I also reconnected with my niece Sophie in a deeper way. She had been my rock during the ordeal, and our bond strengthened in its aftermath. She began bringing her children to visit regularly, and I found joy in being a great aunt, a role that allowed me to share love without the weight of painful history. A year after the trial, I received notice that Melissa had tried to appeal her sentence. The appeal was denied. Jackson, I heard through Harold, had become a model prisoner, likely calculating that good behavior was his best path to early parole. Their story faded from the news cycle, replaced by other scandals and tragedies. I began to measure healing in small milestones. The first night I slept through without nightmares. The first time I laughed without feeling guilty about it. The first holiday I celebrated with my new chosen family without being overwhelmed by memories of the past. 2 years after everything happened, I realized I had gone an entire day without thinking about Jackson or the betrayal. It was a Tuesday ordinary in every way, filled with gardening and a lunch with friends. Only as I prepared for bed did I realize the significance of the day. Nothing had occurred to trigger the painful memories. I had simply lived without the shadow of betrayal, darkening every moment. That night I sat on my porch watching the sunset over the lake, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. Not complete healing, perhaps, that would never come entirely, but a measure of peace with my new reality. The betrayal had changed me fundamentally. I was more cautious now, less naively trusting, but I had not allowed it to make me bitter or closed off. I still chose to see the good in people while being wiser about protecting myself. My experience had taught me painful but valuable lessons. That blood ties don't guarantee love or loyalty. That family can be chosen as well as born. that surviving betrayal requires both strength and vulnerability. And perhaps most importantly, that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting or forgiving what happened, but rather refusing to let it define the remainder of your life. I still carry the scars of what Jackson and Melissa did. How could I not? But scars are evidence not just of wounds, but of healing. They show where we've been hurt, but also that we were strong enough to heal and continue living. If you rewatching this and have experienced betrayal by someone you loved and trusted, know that there is life after such devastation. It won't be the same life you had before, and the path forward isn't straight or easy. There will be days when grief overwhelms you, when anger burns so hot you can barely contain it. But there will also be days of unexpected joy of connections that remind you of the goodness that still exists in the world. Today, I no longer define myself as a victim of betrayal, but as a survivor who has built a meaningful life from the ashes of what was destroyed. I honor the love I gave freely, even if it wasn't returned. I value the genuine connections I've formed in this new chapter, and I find purpose in sharing my story, hoping it might help others navigating similar darkness. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find your way forward afterward? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that survival is possible even after the deepest betrayal. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, the end of one chapter is always the beginning of another. Your next chapter might hold more healing and joy than you can currently imagine.